Welcome into Locked On Sports. And that is the face we have all had the entirety of the day. Nick Angstadt, who's here with us from Locked On Mavericks. It's the Locked On Sports 2024 NBA trade deadline coverage. And it's been fast and furious, especially coming out of Big D. Of course, we hear the news that the Mavs are getting PJ Washington and trading Grant Williams, a Seth Curry 2027 first-round pick. And right off the bat, it seems like, even if it's just on paper, Nick, that's a lot. But what are these Mavs getting for PJ Washington, and for what they gave up wasn't the right call?
Yeah, with this PJ Washington Grant Williams swap, and it's kind of essentially that. The Mavs paid to improve from Grant Williams to PJ Washington. That seems to be what it is. The Mavs have been undersized. They're basically without Derek Lively, he's been injured a little bit here and there. Without him, they're basically undersized at every single position that they have. And so they just needed to add some size somewhere. And so PJ Washington is only an inch taller than Grant Williams. That adds. Some people say an inch like that matters. And then he also has a 7'2" wingspan. And that is a really big deal for the Mavericks. They were both in the same draft. There's a lot of draft people today talking about that they were arguing about who's better, PJ Washington and Grant Williams. And now the Mavericks have made that decision for them, that PJ Washington hopefully is better than Grant Williams overall. He can also get his own shot a little bit here and there. You're not going to try and give him the ball and clear him out and let him go in space, but he scored 40 points a couple times in his career. He can hit the three really well. He's going to get some wide open shots from Luka and Kyrie. And so I think he just fits in really well. You can also now slot Derrick Jones Jr. as a backup instead of trying to have him as a starter. Dante Exum has filled in really well as a starter, and Josh Green has filled in really well as a starter. So you're starting to put this all together. And they give up a first round pick, which is, it's not great for the Mavericks to keep having to fix some of their mistakes with, they signed Grant Williams, they traded a 2030 pick swap for him, and then they now have to trade a first round pick to upgrade from Grant Williams and try to make up for that mistake. And so that doesn't feel that great, but overall it does feel like a step forward for the Mavericks. And it's a kind of like a really aggressive move for them.
Yeah, and I kind of like what you're saying as far as the step forward, because you're seeing kind of that space where they're kind of swapping back and forth with the Sacramento Kings. And this is that time where you're really trying to move yourself out of the play-in situation, if at all possible. And if you can make some moves here and there, some big moves like this that might put you in that position, then yeah, you absolutely have to do it in what I consider to be a very competitive, maybe more competitive than the other side, a very competitive Western Conference. Speaking of that, Mavs weren't finished. The Mavs had another trade. There was, like you said, a swap of the big men. The Mavs get Daniel Gafford. The Wizards get Richaun Holmes and some draft compensation. What the specifics are of that draft compensation, we're still learning. But I think that's an important piece as well, because as we know, as you get deeper into the postseason, or you desire to get deeper into the postseason, you're going to need to be able to play better inside. And so would you see this as potentially getting that help, that support, kind of the upgrade or the rounding out of the roster?
This is a really good move to me. It does depend on what the draft compensation is, but just player-wise, just acquiring somebody like Daniel Gafford, the Mavericks really needed to do, and they've needed to do this for a couple of years. Even going back to the year where they went to the Western Conference Finals, they still struggled with size. They still struggled with rebounding. They just needed a couple of guys to really shore up that middle and that front line. They get Derek Lively in the draft. He's been amazing, a revelation for them, just like the type of center they really wanted. If you look at his numbers in his first 30 or so games compared to Tyson Chandler's numbers in his first 30 or so games when they won the title that year, they're very similar. And so that's wild to look at and see how good he's been. And now you bring in Daniel Gafford to back up Derek Lively. He, is 6'10". He's bigger than all the other Mavericks centers. The Mavericks centers in the past have struggled against him. Gafford's not really going to give you a ton offensively unless you can throw lobs. And guess what? The Mavs throw a lot of lobs. They already throw them to Derek Lively, and so now they're going to throw them to Daniel Gafford. And I think it's a pretty solid move for the Mavericks, especially to move off of that Richaun Holmes contract that they got in the trade that they made to acquire Max Prosper, the Derek Lively trade and all that before. So Nico Harrison moving all these things around and finally getting the right pieces that he actually wants. And Gafford now becomes one of the best backup centers. He was starting all season for the Wizards, and it's him, Isaiah Hartenstein, maybe Steven Adams, who's hurt for the Rockets, but there's not many backup centers that are better than him right now. So this becomes a strength of the Mavericks.
Indeed. Nice little embarrassment of riches as the Mavericks go down this final stretch of the regular season. Thanks so much for stopping by, Nick. Of course, you guys don't forget to like and subscribe. Locked On Mavericks, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.